celebrity doesn't guarantee any success in design because it has to be good. I was called Freud, fiend, fraud quite a lot. I mean, in some ways, I think if I had joined the circus, I might still be in it. And then at a certain point, I just thought, no more psychics. I realised probably around 10 years ago or more, what's going to happen is what I make happen. So get on with it.
Welcome to How to Fail. This is the podcast where we take failure, we flip it on its head, and we consider it something to learn from rather than something to feel shame over. Before we get into this particular episode, please do remember to follow and subscribe so that you never miss a single conversation. Since establishing her eponymous label in 1990, the designer Bella Freud has created in multiple forms, from clothing to interiors to perfume making, films and podcasting. In doing so, she has redefined what it means to be a modern designer. Her playful clothes, the iconic 1970 jumpers, the masculine tailoring with an elegant twist, have garnered a loyal following from the likes of Zadie Smith, Kate Moss and little Simz. And now her podcast, Fashion Neurosis, has become a cult hit, featuring weekly guests lying on a couch being interviewed by Freud about what clothes mean to them. Everyone from Kate Blanchett to Nick Cave has been asked about their sartorial inclinations. It's a witty nod to Freud's own heritage. Her father was the artist Lucian, her great-grandfather, the psychoanalyst Sigmund. Freud's childhood was one of emotional flux and financial uncertainty. She was one of Lucian's 14 children with different women, and when she was 6, her mother took her and her younger sister Esther to Marrakesh on the hippie trail, experiences later recounted in Esther's book, Hideous Kinky. At 16, Freud moved to London and ended up working for Vivienne Westwood in the 1980s, where her fashion apprenticeship started. Freud was a frequent sitter for her artist father until his death in 2011. Of this experience, she has said, "Sometimes I'd watch him being really turbulent, the painting not going well, or maybe something else was going on in the background, but I'd see him go on doing it. I think that was the best, most useful thing I've ever learned." Bella Freud, welcome to How to Fail.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
It's so lovely to be sitting opposite you. I apologise for not having a couch. You are upright in the seated armchair. I really, really adored that quote you gave about sitting for your father. Why do you think it was the most important thing you learned, seeing him in the struggle but continuing?
I think because certainly in fashion or really in anything, there are always challenges, and the success is to be tenacious, to persist. But I think watching him not abandon the work, that was something that went in somewhere. And my tendency, I'm sure I'm not alone in wanting to, change subject. And but I realized that's the worst thing I could do. And often, even when I'm in the middle of something that's going well, I think I'll just go and make the bed or do something else because it's so tempting to leave. But the key is to stay and finish, and then the whole level of reward is so much greater.
Your father drew the Bella Freud logo. Is your designing, in a way, a means of being in conversation with him still?
What I like is to think that he's somehow in everything or on everything, because the logo he drew, I turned into all sorts of, an embroidered little dog, a printed and knitted. It's there all over the place. And I liked the feeling that somehow his art, which couldn't be more further away from fashion. So I often go through his books and think, there must be something I can somehow appropriate in some form. And the only thing that really works as a design is a thing that he did for me as a design. And it's nice to have him there.
Your podcast is this wonderful and unique thing. How has it been for you? Has it taught you something about yourself, the act of asking other people what clothes mean to them?
Well, I've always known that that was what I was interested in, how the power of clothes. And I'd noticed how designers weren't ever asked about the background to it or anything to do with how our work as a designer, any nuance to it or any depth or sort of, it's always the same thing. And because fashion's more visible in reality TV, there's still a sense of if you watch enough TV, you'll end up on TV. But the making aspect is still a vagary. And you see people like drawing or sticking things together, but it's like watching Blue Peter. There isn't, you don't see the process. I hate that word, the process, but the process is so enormous and it changes all the time. I really believe that people were more interested and influenced by what they wear than they even know. And that if they knew, they would find that kind of fascinating.
How frustrating then do you find it? Because you and I have spoken in the past about how hard it is to run a design business and how much graft it requires. So how frustrating is it if you see someone like Molly May Hague releasing...
Who's Molly May Hague? Sorry, is that someone?
Or like a celebrity releasing a fashion line. Would I say Victoria Beckham in this context? I don't know, would I? Is it frustrating?
I just think, oh God, good luck to you, you know. It's a hard business and celebrity doesn't guarantee any success in design because it has to be good, has to be wearable. If there isn't something in it, then it doesn't mean a thing. And I mean, I've no idea who what's her name is.
Molly May Hague.
There may be some good ideas in the beginning, but it's when you go on that you have to have a vision. You have to have the next stage and the next stage. And that's more than ever. You know, it's so hard. It's hard enough for designers who have made their whole world about the story that goes on and the identity and the handwriting. I don't have any cynicism, but it doesn't particularly go in any. And when someone does it well, like Victoria Beckham did, you know, certainly in her start, you felt that's really reflects this part of you that we haven't seen, and it's really cool.
Yeah.
And I like that.
I love what you say there because being creative is artistic, but it's also a craft. It's also about building the wall and putting one brick on top of the other. And I feel like that about writing books as well. And just to answer your question, Molly May Hague was a runner-up one season of Love Island, which I'm imagining is not regular viewing in the Freud household.
I probably should, but I haven't.
On Fashion Neurosis, you ask your guests certain repeat questions. And one of them is always, what are you wearing today and why did you choose it? So I'd like to ask you that question. And then I'd like to ask myself that question.
Yeah.
What are you wearing today, Bella?
Well, I probably should have thought more that this was also filmed because I was thinking about my brain and talking to you. And I decided to wear tailoring because I like tailoring and it makes me feel a bit more engaged as a professional. And it's really cold, and I feel the cold a lot. And I wore this white turtleneck. I love a turtleneck. And then a dark jumper. This one has Bored and Beautiful written on. every now and then I realise I need some new clothes, and luckily I've made some.
Go and make them. You are one of the coolest dressers I know, and you create clothes that I absolutely love. The amount of pockets that you put into garments is a sort of radical act of feminism, I think. And I'm wearing a 1970 Bella Freud top that is one of my favourite items of clothing, and it has a whole history behind it. So it was the first piece of Bella Freud that I owned, and I asked my ex-husband for it when we were married for Christmas one year. So he got me this top. It's, I think, the only item I have kept from that marriage.
Oh, God,
but I couldn't let it go, Bella. And it still carries such good energy for me despite the end of that relationship. And I wear it when I want to bring colour into my outfit, but not in a way that feels overly aggressive.
Yeah.
And I wore it. Here's the twist. I actually wore this top on the day that I met my now husband.
How amazing.
And it was partly because I'd been to see a psychic who had said, you need to wear more colour, because I was going through a phase of sort of beiges and blacks and greys, and I still had this top. And the next day I had this date with this guy from Hinge. I was like, okay, I'll wear my favourite colourful top. And I met Justin wearing this.
Wow.
So thank you.
That's so interesting, the idea that clothes would stay in the past, in a past relationship, and not follow through, and that this was the one that was the bridging.
Definitely.
Yeah, I like that.
Because I think I dressed in a different way when I was in my first marriage for various psychological reasons, which we don't need to get into because this podcast is actually not about me, it's about you. But I did want to do that and to say thank you for making the clothes that you do.
So honoured, thanks.
Let's get on to your first failure, which is being late.
Yes.
Tell me how you started being late. Where does your relationship with lateness stem from?
God, well, I remember asking my shrink why I'm late. And he said, I think it's a love test. Because the whole process of being late is having this plan to meet someone, being late, having this disastrous, adrenalized journey, arriving, wondering if they'll still be there. They're there, and winning them back. And then realizing how demoralizing it is, and how I noticed the pattern of this thing, and also thinking, if I leave now, I could have 10 minutes more work, which I didn't normally do, or what a waste of time to be on time was some sort of awful subliminal thing that kept me being late. And my mother used to be late for me every time, and it got worse and worse and worse. And I hated it so much. And my father was really punctual. One of my extreme latenesses was I'd managed to get Lord Rothschild to give me an hour of his time for business advice. And this was maybe 20 years or I don't know. Anyway, maybe it was the beginning, around 2000. And I arrived an hour late. And his face was just like this smile of absolute derision. And I had 5 minutes left.
Did you have a chance to say anything?
I wished he'd not seen me at all. I had really abused something that was on offer, and it sort of was hitting me what I'd done in this ridiculously kind of self-sabotaging act. It was a really bad moment, but it was good that he saw me, because I felt really bad, and that's exactly what I should have felt. I messed something up badly. It was just shocking how little power I seemed to have over this thing that I had total power over. And then somehow or other, it started to change. And I got less late. And then I got invested. I suddenly saw the kind of fun of being on time. And now I'm punctual. And sometimes I'm early. And I absolutely love it because I have total agency. I realized I was so addicted in a way to the winning of things that I created this scenario in my life where I had to double prove myself by nearly losing the thing I wanted and then seeing if I could just grab it back. And it was a sort of horrible buzz.
That is fascinating. And as you're talking, it's as though I can feel how upsetting those experiences were for you of extreme lateness. And actually what I'm hearing is potentially someone who didn't feel she was worth another person's time. And that internal narrative being confirmed again and again.
Mm.
And I'm interested in whether that version speaks to you.
I mean, it was both a kind of abjectness and an arrogance, because there were people that I felt like, if I'm late, I don't care. And that was fairly sort of unrewarding in itself. It's an incredibly aggressive thing to do. So it's all mixed up in that sense of, am I worth it? And then the ordinariness of being on time creates this massive universe which I have access to. Because there's so much work. It's like, being miserable is a full-time job, and it was an element of that.
Mm. The ordinariness of being on time. What a phrase. I want to come back to it. But I'm very aware of the intimidation I feel talking to Sigmund Freud's great-granddaughter. And I'm now about to say something which Freud would be rolling in his grave over. But how much of this do you think stems from your childhood, Bella? In terms of the chaos that I mentioned in the introduction of the inconsistency of your mother, and I say that with love, but being trailed off to Morocco at such an early age and experiencing periods of abandonment and never knowing whether someone not only was going to be on time, but be there at all. Do you think, can you talk to us a little bit about that and those experiences and how they shaped you?
Everything sort of comes from that. And my sister Esther is very punctual. She's like my father and always a bit early. And I often feel that we're the flip side of the same coin. She's early, I'm late, but it's for similar reasons of control. I used to be very, very sort of focused and disciplined as a child and made all these weird tests for myself. And then when I got to puberty, they suddenly turned and I became chaotic. I created chaotic systems in my life and was self-destructive, and that felt like my agency. But it was, of course, the world became very tiny. I do think it does come from that. I think when I was very young, I managed life because it was essential. I knew how to cook when I was 6 and 7, and I knew what to look out for. I knew what was dangerous. So I was on red alert the whole time. And then I just switched into this messiness. And being late came from that, I think.
It was your rebellion?
I think so, yeah.
Because there was a period of time where your mother left you for several months with strangers.
Yeah. When I was in Morocco, she went to Algeria and I said, I don't want to come. And that was that. It was never revisited and we never talked about it ever. It was just off the table. And so she went to Algeria, and there was no phone. I didn't know where she was, and she didn't know where I was, because the couple who I stayed with, they said they wanted to go traveling, and I said, I'm not coming. But they did organize for me to stay with somebody in Marrakesh, and then I didn't like it there, and I ended up staying with this woman who she was a nurse, and she had a little place where children who'd had polio she would do rehabilitation. They lived there. And then eventually she said, why don't you just come here? And bizarrely, I go to Pilates, and I have been doing so for 25 years. And there was this young man there who was teaching in the studio, and he was her son who hadn't been born then. Because when I met her, she was only in her early 20s. Everyone was so young, and I was 7. And then, my mother came back and found me there. It was a weird time, and I think it created a bit of a gulf between us. And I was sort of horribly aware of how vulnerable my mother was, a young woman alone in Morocco, and because I spoke and understood Arabic, and so I could hear what people said about us. And I mean, people were so kind to us; they were amazing. But I was much more aware of the danger of wandering around, knowing nothing, you know.
You say now that you've discovered the joys of punctuality. When did that change occur?
About 10 years ago. It's quite a while now. But I remember noticing, and it was like watching a dial, an oxygen dial go up, thinking, God, this is kind of exciting. This thing is happening, and I seem to be arriving almost on time, and this thing that felt like it evaded me was suddenly within my means to see how I could get it to the next stage. And then I find now that I get ready to leave with time to arrive there. Whereas before I just constantly mismanaged. I sort of fantasized it would take me 10 minutes to get from Ladbroke Grove to Holborn or whatever, because maybe it could. And now I don't do that, and it just gives me such a kick.
So what was happening for you 10 years ago that prompted this, do you think?
I did this thing called EMDR, which I sort of did it for something else that just haunted me and just wouldn't go away in spite of all the other therapy I'd done. And that really had a good effect on me. And I noticed it seemed to sort of, these catches went off in other areas of my life. This decision-making process improved dramatically, and that was one of the outcomes.
So EMDR is eye movement desensitizing reprogramming, something like that.
Yeah.
It's the tapping thing, isn't it?
Well, it's different things. What it does is with the eye movement, it changes your fight, flight, and freeze responses, your neural patterning. And then I sort of had the sense of the charge was slightly going out of it. Yeah, it was really sort of mysterious, but very effective. And when I went for my first meeting with this practitioner, when I came out, I felt like I was going to faint. I felt like I had an enormous 20-stone man sitting on my chest and taking away my breathing ability. My kind of panic, could feel it there. And it took me a while to go back. And then when I went back, we did this thing, and And it was over some months I felt things changing. And the thing that I'd specifically gone for, which haunted me, and I thought about intermittently every day, 20 times or more, it was like a Bermuda Triangle that gradually closed.
Wow, that's so powerful and so fascinating that eyes, ears, of course, these are sensations that take in so much and carry so much.
Yeah.
That aren't necessarily easily accessed. I'm so glad it worked for you. Can I also ask you, because both your parents died in 2011, is that right? Within a month?
Within a week.
Within a week of each other?
My father was dying of cancer, and we were all expecting him to die. And then a week before he died, my mother went into hospital for some tests, and she'd come and stayed with me, which she didn't do very often, but she'd been to stay with me a few months earlier and said she'd forgotten her painkillers, and she wasn't someone who took painkillers. And I noticed that and thought, God, that's strange. And she said, oh, I've had just some pain in my back or something. She went into hospital. They did some tests, and then they said, you've got a week to live. And she did die a week later. And my father died on July 20th, and she died on 24th. So it was so, so strange.
That must have been horrendous.
Yeah, it was so abstract that and in a way, because she knew she was going to die, and this doctor had told her exactly what would happen. And it seemed to be very peaceful. And I remember, and also it made it possible to ask her things or say things like, ask her if she had a will, say things like, I'm going to miss you. And that was completely normal. I remember saying that to her. And she said, I feel strangely detached from what's happening to me. It was kind of wonderful in a way, because there's nothing, I mean, I don't suppose anyone else would want a long, prolonged death, but her more than anyone. She was a very immediate person, and they discovered she had cancer in 3 places, and it was completely everywhere. We made our peace, and I thought we were going to be at the beginning of some other phase in our lives of begrudging acceptance of each other. And we sort of were, and then that was it. She was gone. It was like a racehorse, an outsider horse streaking to the front. And she said, oh, I'm sorry. I'm just sorry I won't be able to come to Dad's funeral. And then we just laughed. And it was great in some ways, even though it was unbelievably shocking.
I'm so sorry for what you and Esther must have gone through at that time. Did you have an opportunity to say to either of them, I love you, or were you not that kind of family?
I did say to my father once, I'd done some sort of self-help course, and I said, oh, this is the bit where I tell you I love you. And we just laughed. And I think it was really nice, and I'm sure he appreciated that. And I tried that a bit with my mother, and in a way it was more about gestures. And I was so glad that she'd come to stay with me, because we kind of wound each other up, and we had a really nice, she stayed for 2 or 3 nights, and we had a really nice time together. And I remember we went, because she lived in Suffolk, and we went to the Latitude Festival, and we went to see Nick Cave, and then we went to see Blondie. And when we were sort of rocking out, we looked at each other, and I thought, yeah, this is where she just was like a rebellious teenager her whole life. And when I was together with her in that, we got on really well. And we had things out, and some were successful and some much less so. But I suppose there was some kind of acceptance of each other before she died, which was a peaceful thing.
Did your father say, "I love you" back?
No, I don't think so. He didn't really use that language, but he showed it, and in many ways. That didn't matter at all. My intention was to say something that was potentially embarrassing, but I wanted him to know anyway. And so he knew.
Well done you for your courage in navigating your relationship with your mother. Your second failure, seamless link, is not joining the circus.
Oh God,
Bella.
yes.
So was this actually an opportunity?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Tell me this story.
I think I was 19 and I was going through a phase of trying to be an actress or vaguely entertaining, like being in a band or being an actress, being a performer of some kind. And I used to get the stage and look at the adverts, and I saw there was an advert for something or other. I don't know if it said. Anyway, I went for this meeting, and it was in the middle of Shepherd's Bush roundabout where there was this circus. And I was going for a job, it transpired, of being the girl that dances on a ball. You know, when they'd have an enormous ball and there would be someone who somehow stayed on it. And I went for the audition and I got the job. And then...
Wait, so in the audition, did you have to stand on a ball?
No, she just sort of checked me out.
How old were you?
I was 19, I think, 18 or 19. Yeah. It was the first part of the job. I'd have to go and live in Birmingham in a caravan on the site, and I wouldn't be paid for anything at all. No living costs, no food. And then after a month, I think, or it was I would then get my living costs. And then when I was in the circus, I would get a sort of minimum wage. And I just didn't do it. And I stayed home. And I always regretted it. And in some ways, I think if I had joined the circus, I might still be in it. So in some ways, I'm glad I didn't do it because my life took me in a different direction. And it was one of my fantasies as a child to be in the circus. I loved all the people in it. I always loved people in that type of world. And outside, an outsider life with a lot of pride. And it's something that I still think, oh God, I wimped out.
You do look like you'd be a great addition to any circus. I mean that as a compliment.
Yes, no, I take it as that.
You mentioned there that when you were younger, so sort of 6, you were the one who felt you had to be responsible in the absence of adult responsibility.
Yeah.
And then in your teenage years, that switched. And I wonder how that affected your relationship with your younger sister, Esther, if at all.
Yeah, no, it did. Because when we were children, she was the person I trusted. And I don't know if it's an oldest child syndrome that she was so important to me, but I also felt like, I was looking out and she was behind me. So she gave me this moral support, but I was the soldier on the front line. And I mean, whether I was or not is neither here nor there, but and I don't know if other eldest children have that feeling of slight loneliness of we're the ones, we also get the love because we're the first one, but then we lose it and we get the first, we're the ones that are the experimenters, as it were. She just was such a great ally, and she always believed in me and believed me more than anything. And, as a teenager, it's the time where you get dismissed, and very much so in the 70s. And she believed me. And that was such a big thing. I was always grateful and still am for that.
Yes, what's it like today?
That's more important than ever. There's some kind of thing in I can't remember how it exactly goes, about resilience, and it's something to do with trauma when it's not witnessed is a catastrophe, but trauma when there is some sort of witness, i.e. someone believes what happened to you, makes it much easier to recover from. And when your experience is denied, it's just this kind of, you can get stuck in this thing for your whole life of proving or just disappearing because what everyone saw, you're being told didn't happen. To have that information so that it's not dismissed and notice it in other people.
Thank you. It's so rare, I think, that we talk about sibling relationships. And it's rare on this podcast too. And I really value having the chance to talk about it as one of two sisters myself. And I'm the younger sister.
Oh, right.
And I completely agree with you, by the way. I was so grateful to my older sister, Catherine, for being the experimenter, the kind of bulwark, the first defense. And it's just a very interesting relationship that completely shapes who we are and our character.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate how much attention you pay to family. When you do your podcast, Fashion Neurosis, you do it sitting on a chair that was your father's chair in his studio, this sort of battered, beautiful, painterly armchair. And of course, the act of what you're doing is psychoanalytical, as your great-grandfather was the founding father of it. And I just wonder what your relationship is with the Freud name.
My whole relationship was with my father. He never talked about his grandfather. There was no reference, hardly at all. He made a few jokes about him, and it was really about what you do yourself. And he was the model for that. So we didn't use that as a kind of blanket. I felt that would be a bit tacky to just, in the end, if I don't do a good job of whatever it is I'm doing, then who cares? If I then use that as some sort of magic carpet, that's the worst thing I can imagine. So we were never brought up with a thing about Freud at all. But my father, there he was everything to me. And I just he was just such a powerful person in my life. And I looked up at him and how he dealt with life. And he seemed to deal with life by painting through any problems. And also, when I was growing up, no one had heard of Freud apart from intellectuals. So when I was a child, it was just an unpronounceable name for a really long time. And then Clement Freud was on TV. He did these adverts for dog food. And
he was on Just a Minute, wasn't he? Or
yeah, but
he was on Radio 4 a lot.
Yes. But when we were growing up, we didn't have a TV. So sometimes people would say, oh, something about it. And that seemed quite exciting, that someone we were related to that we didn't know was on TV. And then also my father's paintings, people were quite freaked out by them. When I was younger at school, no one knew what it meant. I was called Freud, fiend, fraud quite a lot. And then when I moved to Italy when I was 22, everyone was obsessed with Freud. And that was quite funny. I remember the man in the dry cleaner saying, oh, can you tell me? And I just thought it was hilarious. By that time, I'd got much more I realized that it was really down to me if I was going to be ambitious for making my way in the world. It was got to be about being good at my work.
Have you ever been to a psychic or a clairvoyant who has communicated with Sigmund?
No, I did used to go to psychics all the time, and now I'd never go to one again, because I would sort of, instead of thinking, what should I do, I'd see what they thought I should do. And I often do it, ridiculous, stupid things, always to do with romantic relationships, like when there were obvious red flags. And I'd think, but they said this was the one or something. And then at a certain point, I just thought, no more psychics. But I remember going to this medium who actually gave me some quite brilliant advice. But so I went back again and she said, oh, your grandfather's trying to communicate. I mean, this wasn't Sigmund, this was Ernst, my father's father. He said, I think he likes ice cream. And I thought, okay, that's enough of that.
Well, I wonder if you stopped seeing psychics at around the time that you stopped being late.
Yeah.
Maybe you felt you had your own agency again.
I realized I was just deferring, kind of giving my intelligence to someone else instead of using it. And I have no temptation whatsoever now. And it's much more exciting, actually, like that, instead of waiting for this thing that doesn't really quite make sense. That thing of, I wonder what's going to happen. I realized probably around 10 years ago or more, what's going to happen is what I make happen. So get on with it. Stop messing around with all this rubbish. I mean, I don't not believe in it, but I don't want to be part of that anymore.
I love that for you. Your final failure is another near miss, it sounds like. So we go from the circus to auditioning for Bow Wow Wow with Malcolm McLaren. So to bring the listener and the viewer up to speed, you have not joined the circus, but you did get a job with Vivienne Westwood, and you ended up as her assistant. So does it date from this time in your life, the sort of 20s?
Yeah, because I first worked for Vivienne in her shops, Editionaries, when I was about 17. And then I left and I did other stuff and lived in other places. And when I came back, Malcolm asked me if I wanted to audition. And I was trying to I played music and I always played music. But I remember going to this audition and Bow Wow Wow were amazing. And they had all had a fight and Annabella had left, I think.
Lead singer.
Yeah. She was, and I'd seen her, I'd seen them play, and they were so amazing. And I remember going, and sometimes Malcolm would sort of take me up, or he did take me up, and he sent me for singing lessons. And I went to this audition. I remember feeling really not at my best. And like a bit groggy, and there was another girl there, this gorgeous girl called Pearl, and I sang with them and she sang with them, and then they all huddled round her, and I thought, this isn't going very well. And it was really, really embarrassing. I felt so embarrassed. But in a way, it's good to go through extreme embarrassment. It doesn't matter that much. And I knew it didn't work. I knew I wasn't right. But I'm glad I tried, because this whole thing about failure, of course, is that you can fail and try again. It's a really important thing, because you realize you're not going to die of shame or embarrassment. It's good experience, and it kind of makes you more conscious of what you can or can't do. But what I didn't know at the time was that just wasn't my time to be a performer. And I became a designer where I felt comfortable being behind the scenes and shaping things.
Embarrassment is such an interesting sensation because I think, a bit like you were saying with fashion at the beginning, it can often be dismissed as trivial or absurd or funny. And actually, I think it can go incredibly deep.
Yeah.
And listening to you speak about your embarrassment in this instance makes me think about how closely connected it might have been to fear for you, because you also talked about being able to speak and understand Arabic, and so you could hear what people were saying about your mother, and there was probably an element of embarrassment there, of not wanting to stand out too much, and because you wanted to protect what you could.
There's embarrassment and the shame, which is about just hating your very essence.
Yes.
And I realized I'd done something that was very on that spectrum. And I thought, you just got to live with this. And there are other things where it felt much more extreme. And more privately mortifying about myself. And oddly enough, that wasn't one of them. It's a story I'd totally forgotten. I was racking my brains to think, what failure am I prepared to talk about? And it was sort of like in my fantasy, I'll be a pop star. There is a job waiting that this brilliant girl has just left for a bit. In fact, I think she came back because they couldn't find anyone. There was her, and she was the right person. This other girl got, as it were, the job, but she wasn't in the band in the end. And I realized that this failure of not getting this job was part of the journey of learning.
So drawing this session to a close, do you feel that you are living rooted in the truth of who you are?
I feel like I'm having the time of my life. It's amazing to get to this age. I feel like, I've always done things and I've always been very driven, but I haven't been able to enjoy my life as much as I'm enjoying it now. So that's the most incredible feeling of excitingness and fun and sort of, self-consciousness doesn't have such a grip on me. I'm not so afraid I don't have so much self-doubt. I don't have hardly any, I do, but it's not self-doubt. It's being discriminating about what's good and bad. It's really fun.
You're in your 50s.
I'm older than that.
You make aging so exciting for the rest of us. Thank you, because not only in the way you make us feel in your clothes, but in the example you give us in how to live. So thank you for that. And thank you so much for coming on How to Fail.
Oh, thank you, Elizabeth. That's so lovely to be here with you. And I have such high regard and I love what you do. And I love the happiness you have in your life. It's such a beautiful thing. It's wonderful.
Thank you so much. I feel very seen by you. Anytime we have met, and it hasn't been that many, but I feel very seen by you. And I think that's a gift that you give.
Well, you give that too. You make that possible. So
thank you. Well, this 1970 jumper has seen me through so much, so thank you. Please do follow How to Fail to get new episodes as they land on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, or wherever you get your podcasts. Please tell all your friends. This is an Elizabeth Day and Sony Music Entertainment original podcast. Thank you so much for listening.